Right. Great, I got the timer working too. That's perfect, actually. Let's post that shit. Very good. I do need to double check, though, if I have... let's see if I go to this, go to filters, look at the clipping mask. Let's see. I believe the reproportioned gradient is the one that I want to use for this. Reproportion. Yes, it is. Okay. Good, 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 good. Hello, Gotron. Welcome back. Nice. Let me make sure, actually. I want the camera to have me... There we go. I want the camera to kind of have me clear of the chat. So I'd be sitting, like, here. I'm occupying this part of the frame, and then chat is on the bottom left. Couldn't catch your last stream because I was sleeping. That is perfectly fine. You know, my stream is not, it's not college homework. And it's also not your job. So it's by no means obligatory for you to show up. It's a very much watch if you feel like kind of affair. So, anyway, what's up? What's up? I need to change something. I need to change something around real quick. There we go. I think that's better. More fun than school. A lot of things are more fun than school in America, you know. Today I wanted to do actually a very special July 4th stream. Happy July 4th. Eat some yummy hot dogs or hamburger or something, or mac and cheese. Look, there's plenty of fun to be had on July 4th, even though we all acknowledge that America fucking sucks. But that is actually relevant to the special topic of today's stream. Hot dog with whipping cream. You're not that far off, the Void, yes. And also welcome back to chat. Yeah, you know, we do some goofy shit on July 4th. I've been the origin point of a couple of noise complaints because of some chuckle fucks that light up fireworks outside at like 3 in the morning when I'm trying to sleep. Like repeatedly. And by repeatedly, I mean they don't just do it on the evening of July 4th. Usually I'm like pretty lenient, like I'm pretty fine with people being up all night on July 4th setting off fireworks, but then like on July 5th and 6th and 7th and 8th and they're still doing it, I'm like, dog, I'm trying to sleep. Just America things. People will fucking go to the nearest public park and light the fuse on some lightweight explosives for fun, because there's nothing else to fucking do in this country. I like Attack on Titan, but I love its music. I gotta buy it if it was that much of a problem. I would buy noise canceling headphones. Yeah, that'd be great and all, except I don't think I could sleep with noise-canceling headphones, because I sleep on my side. Seriously, I actually have I have some trouble sleeping on my back, and when I went and bought the new mattress that I'm using now, I was specifically scouting for a mattress that would be good for me sleeping on my side. This mattress is not the greatest for sleeping on my back, but it is really good ergonomically for sleeping on my side. I have like I used to pull my muscles a lot more frequently when I didn't stretch as much, and that would be made a lot worse when I had a very hard mattress with not a lot of padding. And this mattress is a lot better for that. Even when I pull a muscle, it gets better a lot more quickly because my body's actually able to recover when I sleep. I'm the opposite. I can make my body sleep in a lot of ways. Oh, I sleep real deeply. The problem was that I would wake up when the pain was so unbearable, it would literally wake me from sleep. Which is a high bar to clear because I've slept through literal hurricanes before. I've slept through hurricanes, I've slept through tornadoes, thunderstorms with very loud lightning strikes, flash flooding, and so on, right? It's just that, like, the previous bed was so bad for me. Imagine this, like I have some minor muscle soreness when I go to bed, and then it's literally so painful that I'm like paralyzed from the waist down when I wake up. It not permanently, but like if I try to move, everything hurts. That's how bad for my back and like my legs my previous mattress was. Uh, and ordinarily I would be able to sleep through the night and then wake up in the morning and I would like suffer for the whole fucking day because of it. This is just to make sure that I don't wake up in a state of pain. I didn't have that much trouble sleeping on the previous mattress. In that situation, I pretend I'm the main character and try to fight through the pain. I've done that. I've done that before as well. But it doesn't work forever. Was it made of cement? No, it was just a really firm, like, basically imagine a military, like a spring-loaded military cot, and that's what I was sleeping on for the better part of how long was I sleeping on that? The mattress came with a bed that I got when I was in early high school, so probably about 8 or 9 years I was sleeping on a effectively what was a cot. Um, and but eventually, it was too much. So now I have this is still a pretty firm mattress. It's still a pretty firm mattress. I learned that I have a preference for firm mattresses, but I feel like I learned that there's kind of a hard limit that it has to also not be horrid for my back and my tailbone. Mine is so fluffy, I just melt there. I can't sleep on fluffy mattresses very well. Whenever I go to like a hotel or whatever, and they have the mattresses that are really soft, I can't, I have a hard time sleeping, or like I wake up with a headache or something like that. I don't know. If I get a weighted blanket, I will cease to be awake. True. It's like you sleeping in a cloud or some shit. Weighted blankets will do me in big time as well. All right. I came here to look up some stuff. Let's see. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I had an incoherent dream, so I woke up discombobulated. Bro, I've had those before. Dude, you know what's the weirdest fucking thing? Some of the best sleep I've ever had in my life is when I get a fever dream. Fever dreams actually feel great. They feel like a roller coaster when I'm asleep, except without the real threat of me throwing up, so I just get to enjoy it. And then when I wake up, I feel like I've had the greatest sleep that I've ever had. And it's like, bro, why can't my brain just supply me with fever dreams more often? You imagine how fucking cracked I'd be at everything if I was sleeping that well every night? It's like flashing different images. I gotta move the timer thing. Okay. This is what we're gonna do today. Flashing different images? That sounds really uncomfortable. In light of the big beautiful bill passing, the BBB is now the BBL. Big beautiful law. I think Trump is set to sign it potentially today, or very soon at the very least. The plan for the Republicans, it was to pass the big beautiful bill by July 4th, but I don't know if they're going to be able to meet that deadline. Nonetheless, it passed the House, it passed the Senate, it passed the House in the reconciliation process. So now it goes to the president's desk where Trump signs it into law, and the Republicans, uh, uh, with the help of very ineffective resistance from the Democrats, take away everything that makes America like even remotely livable. Um, And I felt like today would be a great occasion to explore what those things are that the Republicans are trying to take away and have been trying to take away ever since they were implemented in the first place. It's important to remember, I'm about to go through Franklin Delano Roosevelt's and Lyndon B. Johnson's administration's accomplishments. The Republicans opposed their agendas before they were implemented, right? They opposed them as they were trying to implement these social programs, and they opposed them after the fact. All the while, they have somehow, because there's like no counter narrative, somehow they have convinced people that no, we actually like these things, despite the fact that everything we have ever done indicates that we want to get rid of all these programs that help like tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of people. How many people will lose healthcare? Too many. I think the numbers around 17 million. Let's start with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I am mostly concerned with his presidential career because we're going to be talking about what FDR's administration accomplished between 1932 and 1944, when or 1945 actually. He died a few months into his fourth presidential term. All right. Yeah, that's a lot. Let's get started. Let's see, the 1932 presidential election. As the 1932 election approached, Roosevelt turned his attention to national politics, established a campaign team led by Howe and Farley. And these are probably people that they talked about earlier, people he had known in his earlier political career. And a brain trust of policy advisors, primarily composed of Columbia and Harvard University professors. Some were not so sanguine about his chances, such as Walter Lippmann, the dean of political commentators, who observed, "He is a pleasant man who, without any important qualifications for the office, would very much like to be president." I wonder who this critique fucking reminds me of. This limp dick, "you're not qualified to be president of the United States" ass argument. Motherfucker, nobody's qualified to be the president of the United States. You're running a goddamn country. Nobody's qualified for that position. You just get there and do like what you can and hope it works out. Also love the inclusion of the intelligentsia into running a left-leaning campaign. Great, thank you. Wish the Democrats would do any of that nowadays. But we see here in the 1930s, the Democrats were also very cringe and soy and centrist. However, Roosevelt's efforts as governor to address the effects of the Depression in his own state established him as the frontrunner for the 1932 Democratic presidential nomination. Roosevelt rallied the progressive supporters of the Wilson administration while also appealing to many conservatives, establishing himself as the leading candidate in the South and West. Yes, a tactical individual of tactical prowess, by which I mean he appealed to racist people. The chief opposition to Roosevelt's candidacy came from Northeastern conservatives. Speaker of the House John Nance Garner, known as Cactus Jack, okay, of Texas, and Al Smith, the 1928 Democratic presidential nominee. So the fucking wealthy-ass Northeastern Republicans hated him, and the Democratic Party insiders hated him. Roosevelt entered the convention with a delegate lead due to success in the 1932 primaries, but most delegates entered the convention unbound to any particular candidate. I'm not particularly interested in the details of the primary. Let's see. Roosevelt flew into New York, from New York to Chicago after learning he'd won the nomination, becoming the first major party presidential nominee to accept the nomination in person. Wow, this was the first time they did that? That's crazy. His appearance was essential to show himself as vigorous despite his physical disability. For anybody who is somehow not aware of this, FDR had polio as a boy and was paralyzed for his entire life. Even in the videos of him standing up, he is paralyzed from the waist down. But the American people did not know this for the entirety of his presidency because he was very careful about how he presented himself on camera. He was aware that the power that, like, he was aware of the power that he knew how to aura farm, and he knew that aura farming was essential to being an effective president and making your political opponents scared of you. And to do that, you had to be standing up at the podium and commanding presence. You had to farm aura, and to farm aura, you had to stand up, because that's how you do that. So basically, he had it was either a set of braces or crutches that would go from the waist down, so that effectively it would stabilize his legs as he was standing stationary at a podium giving a speech. And that's how he was able to show up in person to all this shit and give these acceptance speeches and whatnot. And Americans literally didn't know he had polio until he had already died. In his acceptance speech, Roosevelt declared, I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people. This is foreshadowing to the important shit. This is more than a political campaign. It is a call to arms. No Democrat would ever speak like this. First disabled president? Yes, in fact, he may be actually the only disabled president America has ever had. You know, if you don't count, like, profound mental retardation, by which standard every Republican president post Roosevelt, or post Eisenhower, I guess, would have been a disabled president. Yeah. Roosevelt promised securities regulation, tariff reduction, farm relief, government-funded public works, and other government actions to address the Great Depression. Basically, we will buy our way out of the Depression because the government has the ability to do this. Then just say physically disabled. Well, I think disabled generally is like a better way to put it, because colloquially people think disabled and they think wheelchair, right? You know, not just like being an idiot. Securities regulation. Oh yeah, this is like, that's because they're morons. Exactly. And I don't really, you know, I feel like for the sake of colloquially understanding, like, the significance of this, you know. How long till one of them Skibbity Toilets Watchers becomes president? Well, they'll be eligible in about 10 to 15 years. I'm 24 right now. I'm going to turn 25 next month. And in order to run for president of the United States, you have to be at least 35 years old. There is actually a minimum age requirement to run for president. You also have to be a natural-born citizen. You don't have to be born in the United States, but you do have to be a citizen of the United States by birth. So, I don't know. You know, when I'm, like, in my middle-aged years, we might see some Skibbity Riz Ohio lords running for president. Is there a minimum education requirement? No, there is not. And in some ways that's for the better, in some ways that's for the worse. I think correct me if, well, actually, I don't even want to hazard a guess at this. Was Harry Truman college educated? Of course there isn't. That would hurt Republicans. Yeah. After graduating Independence High School, Truman took classes at Spalding's Commercial College, Kansas City Business School. Stopped after a year. Yeah, okay. So Harry Truman is proof of that. Harry Truman was actually a college dropout and became president of the United States. And he's not remembered as like a particularly bad president, right? He was also the least wealthy president that America has ever had, funnily enough. Let's see, securities regulation, right? Because the banks caused a lot of the. It's always the fucking investment banks and speculation and shit. This was the cause of the Great Depression. Like unmitigated speculation by banks, leading to a complete collapse of the economic system and like horrid conditions. I heard there was one president that became homeless afterwards. That's Truman. That you're thinking of President Truman. That's the same guy. Tariff reduction. Yeah, the United States had tariffs at this time as well. At the time, the wheels of globalization were still pretty early in their rotation, I guess you could say. People had noticed that the global economy was developing and emerging. He had the most money, became homeless afterwards. Truman? No. Truman was not wealthy as far as American presidents go. You're just confusing me? Oh, okay. Farm relief, government-funded public works, the Democrats would never, and other government actions to address the Great Depression. Reflecting changing public opinion, the Democratic platform included a call for the repeal of prohibition. Roosevelt himself had not taken a public stand on the issue prior to the convention, but promised to uphold the party reform. Otherwise, Roosevelt's primary campaign strategy was one of caution, intent upon avoiding mistakes that would distract from Hoover's failings on the economy. His statements attacked the incumbent and included no other specific policies or programs. This is interesting. This is something that hasn't aged as well. Because of the way that the media landscape has changed, you do actually have to indicate that you personally believe in something rather than just leading attack campaigns against your opponents. You have to walk and chew gum at the same time. Remember what Zoran Mamdani did. That would not have worked as well if he didn't mention specific things like rent control, rent freezing, free buses, grocery stores, etc. Yeah, people have gotten more polarized. And so campaigns have to reflect that. But at the time, this did work because people were stricken by the immediacy of Herbert Hoover's failures. Keep in mind that Herbert Hoover was the president of the United States from 1929 to 1932, and even though there's a limited amount of things that he could have done to prevent the Depression from happening altogether, he made it worse at every turn. Herbert Hoover was a laissez-faire liberal. He was the worst kind of like free market liberal running the United States at a time when free market liberalism was eating itself alive, when the country was being cannibalized by like speculation. And so I guess that was like low enough hanging fruit. After the convention, Roosevelt won endorsements from several progressive Republicans, including George W. Norris, Hiram Johnson, and Robert La Follette Jr. This was at a time when the party switch was kind of ongoing. The political parties used to be a lot less ideologically differentiated than they are today. A lot of them were more sectionally oriented, and there was a lot more variation state by state. For example, up until about the 1960s, there were socialists in both the Democratic and Republican parties. There were liberals in both the Democratic and Republican parties. There were conservatives in both the Democratic and Republican parties. There were fascists in both the Democratic and Republican parties. In fact, the only other socialist mayor that New York City has ever had was a Republican who was reviled by both the Democratic and Republican parties of the time. Back in the day, you could actually build an across party lines coalition because party lines didn't actually mean an ideological divide. Nowadays, the line of being a Democrat or being a Republican is the line between being, I don't know, maybe an ineffectual or well-meaning liberal or potentially being a socialist, and between being like Hitler. Like I said, polarization. It's like the polarization, it kind of goes one way or the other initially. It was a different time, but pretty similar in some respects. Otherwise, okay, I read that. Let's see. He also reconciled with the party's conservative wing, and even Al Smith was persuaded to support the Democratic ticket. Hoover's handling of the bonus army. Okay, these were like post-World War I group of protests. Further damaged the incumbent's popularity as newspapers across the country criticized the use of force to disperse assembled veterans. Yeah, and you know how like Gavin Newsom treats homeless people in California? The Hoover administration did that to homeless World War I veterans, like soldiers. You can imagine how that went over. Roosevelt won 57% of the popular vote and carried all but 6 states. Historians and political scientists consider the 1932 to 36 elections to be a political realignment. Roosevelt's victory was enabled by the creation of the New Deal coalition. Small farmers, the Southern whites, Catholics, big city political machines, labor unions, Northern black Americans, Southern ones were still disenfranchised, yeah, Jim Crow, Jews, intellectuals, and political liberals. Basically, everybody to the left of Hitler was like, all right, we need to do social democracy. Like that, I'm so surprised. I say sarcastically, yeah. Yeah, laissez-faire liberals, famously anti-big government until somebody's protesting on the street corner, in which case call in the fucking military and the people with guns to use force to escort them off the premises. You know? The creation of the New Deal coalition transformed American politics and started what political scientists called the New Deal party system or the fifth party system. between the Civil War and 1929, Democrats had rarely controlled both houses of Congress. I fucking wonder why. And had won just 4 of 17 presidential elections from 1932 to 79. Democrats won 8 of 12 presidential elections and generally controlled both houses of Congress. Transition and assassination attempts. Roosevelt was elected in November of 32, but like his predecessors, didn't take office until the following March. Interesting. So it didn't used to always be January. After the election, President Hoover sought to convince Roosevelt to renounce much of his campaign platform and to endorse the Hoover administration's policies. What the fuck is wrong with laissez-faire liberals, dude? Dude, I know that you like ran on massive government action, but please, I know that you're probably also just in it for the bag because I'm just in it for the bag and I'm like projecting that onto you. Please like rescind every good thing that you've ever supported and support my failed policies of laissez-faire capitalism that have doomed this country to despair for 4 years and like fucking 30% unemployment and homeless veterans everywhere. What the like in what world would do you do this seriously? Well, for starters, the liberals? Yeah, true. Roosevelt refused Hoover's request to develop a joint program to stop the economic decline, claiming that it would tie his hands and that Hoover had the power to act. Fucking based? He's like, damn, if you have such a great idea, why didn't you fucking do that when you were president, dumbass? During the transition, Roosevelt chose Howe as his chief of staff, and Farley as postmaster general. It's weird seeing how not that long ago the Democrats and Republicans weren't that different. They're still not in some ways, but yeah, it really isn't that long ago. People in America have a very inflated sense of time, in the same way that like what is it? It's like in America 100 years is a long time, in Europe 100 miles is a long distance or some shit like that. 1932 is politically pretty recent, and the party system in America has gone through like very weird growing pains. And this is part of that, where America has a first past the post system, but it hasn't always been well defined ideologically. Guess it's also because ever since I was born, stuff was like this. I mean, yeah, it's been, I only have, for a frame of reference, like, what I've been alive to see, right? Why is reality making me be like Mr. V, where I'm right and everyone who disagrees with me is mentally ill? Probably because, like, if you're on the left, that means politically your opinions are right, and like, everybody who disagrees is mentally ill and, like, hates humanity. Because, like, if you're on the left, the shit you support isn't, like, that complex. You could be a policy wonk about it if you want, but fundamentally it's like, okay, homelessness is bad and people deserve a house to live in. That's pretty good, I think. Like, food insecurity is bad and people should be able to get food, I think. Things are way too expensive and people need to be paid enough to live, I think. And like, damn, if you're a minority, shit kind of sucks, and that's bad, I think. Shit shouldn't just automatically suck if you're a minority. And those are, like, basic ground principles. Also, like, a few, like, people controlling all the wealth and land and resources in society, like, enough people for you to count on one or maybe two hands, is pretty bad. Like, I don't like when there's authoritarians running around, like, whipping their dick out whenever they feel like it. That's pretty bad. And these are really basic positions. So it is kind of the reality of the matter that if you disagree with any one of those, you are just mentally ill. EU's just a fact of life for me, even if like 50 years ago it didn't exist or something. The EU is actually older than the modern American party system. The EU started as the, I think it was the European Coal Commission. It was some sort of European economic bloc, like the European Economic Commission, EEC, EU. It's like the, European Economic Community was a regional organization created by the Treaty of Rome in 1957. Okay, yeah. And our current party system is more recent than 1957. So the EU is actually older than modern American politics. That gives you kind of a scope of how recently shit has been happening in America, Anyways. William Wooden, a Republican industrialist close to Roosevelt, was chosen for Secretary of the Treasury, while Roosevelt chose Senator Cordell Hull of Tennessee as Secretary of State. Harold Ickes and Henry Wallace, two progressive Republicans, were selected for Secretary of Interior and Agriculture, respectively. In February of 1933, Roosevelt escaped an assassination attempt by Giuseppe Zangara, who had expressed a hate for all rulers. Okay, this guy might have been based, but, like, assassinating people is, like, pretty bad, I think. That's just not a good idea. As he was attempting to shoot Roosevelt, Zangara was struck by a woman with her purse and mortally wounded by Chicago Mayor Anton Chermak, who was sitting alongside Roosevelt. What the fuck? Chicago Mayor just fucking threw hands with this guy, this would-be assassin? This belongs in a fucking comedy movie. I'm fucking schizo Italian anarchist who is otherwise based, but I'm gonna, like, exercise my mental illness by trying to kill the soon-to-be president of the United States, gets hit by a woman with her purse, gets beaten to death by the mayor of Chicago. You can't write this shit, dude. If I wrote this and didn't know it was real, it would have been like, yeah, haha, this is so stupid, nobody would believe this. Goes to Wikipedia that it actually happened. Alright, now the good shit. The presidency. So already, Roosevelt has been, like, hated by many of the insiders and conservatives in both the Democratic and Republican parties because he's too based, right? And he's like, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna get all the progressives and my, like, rich friends from New York who are just, like, ride or die for me, and I'm gonna fill the administration with them. We're gonna fucking do the New Deal coalition. Everybody left of Hitler wants this shit. As president, Roosevelt appointed powerful men to top positions in government. However, he made all of his administration's major decisions himself, regardless of any delays, inefficiencies, or resentments doing so may have caused. Analyzing the president's administrative style, Burns concludes, the president stayed in charge of his administration by drawing fully on his formal and informal powers as chief executive, by raising goals, creating momentum, inspiring a personal loyalty, getting the best out of people, by deliberately fostering among his aides a sense of competition and a clash of wills that led to disarray, heartbreak, and anger, but also set off pulses of executive energy and sparks of creativity, by handing out one job to several men and several jobs to one man, thus strengthening his own position as a court of appeals, as a depository of information, and as a tool of coordination, by ignoring or bypassing collective decision-making agencies such as the cabinet, and always by persuading, flattering, juggling, improvising, reshuffling, harmonizing, conciliating, manipulating. Basically, imagine if an alternate universe Trump existed who was properly college educated and based, but basically had the same management strategy in a federal government with much, much less administrative weight behind it. So a lot more of the authority of the executive branch was solely vested in the president, but there's also significantly fewer tools at the president's disposal to make that happen. Effectively, what I'm saying is, this is a little bit reminiscent, if you know anything about Juan Perón, this is like American Peronism, basically. FDR was basically, like, kind of a strongman, but he decided that, like, he was going to be the Perón-style strongman before Perón. He was going to create the New Deal and fill the government with, like, labor officials and work with labor unions to rescue America from the Great Depression, effectively. First and second terms, 1933 to 41. So this would have been largely before America's involvement in the Second World War. When Roosevelt was inaugurated on March 4th, 1933, the U.S. was at the nadir of the worst depression in its history. The nadir, I believe, is the opposite of, like, the zenith. So where, like, the zenith or the apex is the highest point, the nadir is, like, the lowest point. A quarter of the workforce was unemployed, and farmers were in deep trouble as prices had fallen by 60%. Industrial production had fallen by more than half since 1929. This was when America was still a manufacturing power. This is when, like, outsourcing wasn't a thing yet. The economy was not globalized enough for outsourcing to exist in any appreciable capacity. So all the manufacturing had to happen domestically. 2 million people were homeless by the evening of March 4th. 32 of the 48 states as well as DC, had closed their banks. So there's like no official bureaucracy left to move money around. Like legitimately, it was a complete and total collapse. There's a lot of social memory that gets lost about the Great Depression, particularly in America. This was a comprehensive collapse of the entire economy. Like the semblance of a complex economic system was actually decaying away. Probably because people get older than die. It's partly that, but also a lot of this gets written out of the history books. A lot of this would still be in the social memory if they taught it to us in school, but they didn't. Historians categorize Roosevelt's program as relief, recovery, and reform. Relief was urgently needed by the unemployed. Could you imagine the fucking government doing this today? This was back when Keynesianism was like the governing philosophy of most social democracies of the time. So basically, yeah, why don't we just give unemployed people money that they can like spend on food and shit? And that works. When you give people money, they spend it, especially if they need it. School tries to treat history as not political, and that is a major mistake, I think, of education, both in the U.S. and elsewhere, to the extent that this exists elsewhere as well. Recovery meant boosting the economy back to normal, and reform was required through financial and banking systems. Through Roosevelt's 30 fireside chats, he presented his proposals directly to the American public as a series of radio addresses. This would basically be like if I mean, this is basically comparable to Zoran Mamdani. Radio was new. Television was new. The fireside chats, this was like the first time in history that there was like a opportunity to use media messaging to connect directly into people's like home media consumption. Basically, imagine if Zoran becomes mayor, or if someone like him were president, they just decided, I'm gonna fucking lock in and post to Insta and TikTok every day with like policy objectives, and I'm gonna post about the same fucking policy objective and explain it over and over and over again until it happens. And the whole time I'm going to lambast all the politicians that don't want it to happen. This guy was capable, because he kind of understood how to generate political energy to make people want to do something, because he was adept at using new means of communication. He was capable of moving heaven and earth. And every single politician in office today is capable of that. But they don't do it, either because they're too stupid or because they don't care, or both. Democrats need to be posting, like, if you get a competent Democrat in office, doesn't matter what office, they need to be posting to TikTok and Insta non-stop about what they want to do. They need to be flooding as many media channels as possible to crowd out the Republicans, so the Republicans have to go on the defensive and try to argue why what you want to do is bad, actually. All the while you talk about how you want free bus transportation and lower rents. It is a foolproof strategy. The only hiccup is that you need to adjust to the media circumstances of the time. Energized by his own victory over paralytic illness, he used persistent optimism and activism to renew the national spirit. Again, something that Democrats fucking suck at doing nowadays. Day one of trying to make groceries cheap again. Yeah, literally, like, if Roosevelt were like, yeah, dude, that would go crazy. Can you imagine? Like, what's a problem nationally? Like, apart from grocery prices, you know, we could pick rent. What about healthcare? What if you just got on TikTok and Insta, you started posting as the president every day, and you basically made every media appearance of yours about healthcare, about how, like, we need Medicare for all, we need single payer healthcare, and every politician that disagrees is selling out the American people because they've suffered for too long. If that was like the core message, you just did that over and over and over again. You know how fucking quickly we would have Medicare for all in this country? You know how quickly any problem would get solved in this country if the president were actually capable of like doing this? Roosevelt did this 80 years ago. Imagine what a savvy individual could do today with this kind of power. Roosevelt only had a fraction of the reach with radio and did like 1,000 times as much as the Democrats have in the past, well, my whole life, actually. Now let's talk about the first New Deal. Now we get to the things that Republicans want to take away from you that the Democrats don't care about, and that Roosevelt was super based for doing. On his second day in office, Roosevelt declared a 4-day national bank holiday to end the run by depositors seeking to withdraw funds. He called for a special session of Congress on March 9th, when Congress passed almost sight unseen the Emergency Banking Act. The act, first developed by the Hoover administration and Wall Street bankers, gave the president the power to determine the opening and closing of banks and authorize the Federal Reserve banks to issue banknotes. The Federal Reserve used to not be able to print money, which is fucking insane. The banking system in the United States was truly in tatters at this time. The first 100 days of the 73rd United States Congress saw an unprecedented... Also this, like, giving the president the authority to determine which banks are open and closed and when is kind of like soft nationalizing the banking system. It's like nationalizing it without nationalizing it, if that makes sense. This is actually... I would actually point to this as the first flaw of the Roosevelt administration. They should have just fucking nationalized them. But either way, same effect. It's just the long-term implications that differ. The first 100 days of the 73rd Congress saw an unprecedented amount of legislation and set a benchmark against which future presidents have been compared. When the banks reopened on Monday, March 15th, stock prices rose by 15%, and in the following weeks over $1 billion was returned to bank vaults, ending the bank panic. This meant that, like, banks actually had the money to give to people. Like, a lot of people nominally still had money in the bank, but the banks were like, dog, that's not your money anymore. We spent it. And the government was like, no, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put that money back in the vault, and then you're going to fucking give that money to the people you owe it to. On March 22nd, Roosevelt signed the Cullen-Harrison Act, which brought prohibition to a close. Fucking finally, alcohol is legal again. Being Irish is legal again. You know, allegedly. There's still a lot of discrimination at the time. Roosevelt saw the establishment of a number of agencies and measures designed to provide relief for the unemployed and others. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration, under the leadership of Harry Hopkins, distributed relief to state governments. The Public Works Administration, PWA, oversaw the construction of large-scale public works such as dams, bridges, and schools. Oh yeah, infrastructure projects, which Republicans also don't want to fund. Here's a first definitive example of a good thing that Republicans literally don't want to exist. Didn't want to exist at the time, and have spent their whole fucking political existence ever since trying to get rid of. And by Republicans, I mean, like, mostly conservatives, but like, you know, this would trend more towards the Republican Party as time would go on. Remember what I said about, like, both parties being, like, very ideologically idiosyncratic at this time? Conservatives always fucking hated this, and they've made it their life's mission to get rid of the Public Works Administration, because anything that involves public spending that poor people benefit from fundamentally is a downward transfer of wealth, because tax brackets are proportional or usually progressive. Rich people are taxed more than poor people. And while that alone doesn't address the underlying, like, property relations, it does sort of act as a stopgap and allow poor people room to breathe. And conservatives don't want that. Conservatives fucking hate you, especially if you're poor. The Rural Electrification Administration brought electricity for the first time to millions of rural homes. Another thing that, like, modern Republicans and Democrats have slacked upon is the modernization infrastructure of you know, America. Although this time it's kind of the urban environments that they don't really care about, because they're, for whatever reason, they're obsessed with appealing to rural America, which is dead and is home to 0 people. The most popular of all the New Deal agencies, and Roosevelt's favorite, was the Civilian Conservation Corps, which hired 250,000 unemployed men for rural projects. Roosevelt also expanded Hoover's Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which financed railroads and industry. Financing railroads, modern American politicians could fucking never, dude. There's a midpoint of the conservatives, like, if you be nicer, I might consider your idea. And, like, the problem with that is that, like, no, I'm not being nicer to conservatives. Sorry. You should try supporting shit that doesn't get, like, tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of people killed per year. Can't believe they actually think that we'll buy that. They tried that for the longest time, and some people did buy it. Those people ended up just becoming conservatives. Because if your politics is dictated by who's nice to you, then it's like you've just opened the door for your own like manipulation and purchase, basically. So yeah, here's another thing. Where so far we're like 2 paragraphs into the first New Deal, and I've already identified like 3 things that modern conservatives have spent their entire political lifespan trying to like wrench out of the hands of Americans. And people in other countries, but specifically this is in the context of American politics because it's July 4th. Congress gave the FTC broad regulatory powers and provided mortgage relief. Oh, broad regulatory powers. Another Republican just fucking died at the thought of that. And provided mortgage relief to millions of farmers and homeowners. Maybe they also died of diabetes. One or the other. Take your pick. Roosevelt also set up the Agricultural Adjustment Administration to increase commodity prices by paying farmers to leave land uncultivated and cut herds. These policies were criticized when, in a few cases, crops were intentionally plowed under and livestock was killed as a result. Yeah, this seems like another thing that could cause problems. Another, minor flaw. I think they actually address this eventually. Reform of the economy was the goal of the National Industry Recovery Act of 1933. It sought to end cutthroat competition by forcing industries to establish rules such as minimum prices, agreements not to compete, and production restrictions. Damn, it's almost like an economy organized entirely around the concept of competition is like self-defeating and will consume itself. Industry leaders negotiated the rules with NIRA officials who suspended antitrust laws in return for better wages. The Supreme Court in May 1935 declared NIRA unconstitutional to Roosevelt's chagrin. Yeah, that seems like it might run afoul of the Constitution, but like, who fucking cares? This is like cool, actually, except for the part where they suspended antitrust agreements necessarily. But like, not a fan of competition in economics, actually. It creates some pretty toxic-ass incentives. He reformed financial regulations with the Glass-Steagall Act. Would you believe it? This is, what's his name? Not E.C. Glass. It was his brother. Anyways, this is like the high school that my dad went to or something. That's what I was getting at. Creating the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation to underwrite savings deposits. Yep, this was when the FDIC was created, where basically they're like, look, it's guaranteed by the government that if you put up to this much money in the bank, that's still your fucking money, and they have to give it back to you. And the Republicans have floated the idea of getting rid of the FDIC. They literally just want to do the Great Depression again. The act also limited affiliations between commercial banks and securities firms. Oh shit! I didn't know this was in there. Republicans already got rid of that one because commercial banks are securities firms now. That's the whole reason we have the term investment bank. Like the fucking concept of an investment bank is exactly what this fucking law, the Glass-Steagall Act, said. Like, no, you can't fucking do that. Like, that's illegal. That's like an extreme conflict of interest that only leads to massive speculation and you gambling with other people's money. Not allowed, idiot. And conservatives were like, we don't need that. It won't happen again. Literally, they used that argument. They were like, it's not going to happen again. Cut to the next scene where it happens again. In 1934, the SEC was created to regulate the trading of securities, while the Federal Communications Commission was established to regulate telecommunications. The NIRA included $3.3 billion, which is equivalent to $80 billion in today's money, through the Public Works Administration to support recovery. Roosevelt worked with Senator Norris to create the largest government-owned industrial enterprise in American history, the Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, which built dams and power stations, controlled floods, and modernized agriculture and home conditions in the poverty-stricken Tennessee Valley. This is why, to my knowledge, This is why a lot of electricity and like power and water is still the purview of either governments or government owned companies, and not strictly the private sector. This right here, this initial investment set a standard that was like impossible to roll back. Like, yeah, let's just fucking privatize your water supply and the electric grid. Like, to my knowledge, the only state that has been really successful in privatizing power or water is Texas. And look how that fucking worked out for them. Like, hundreds of people die every summer and every winter because they have zero redundancies, and their only concern is like, how much can we bill people for electricity? Locals criticize the TVA for displacing thousands of people for these projects. Yeah, that tends to happen when you're constructing dams and shit. Definitely more community outreach could have been done here. The Soil Conservation Service trained farmers in the proper methods of cultivation, and with the TVA, Roosevelt became the father of soil conservation. Okay. I'm guessing this is like some sustainable farming practices? Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. Okay, I can't believe I forgot about this. This is actually really relevant because part of the Great Depression was a severe over farming of the land and like rapidly degrading agricultural conditions, specifically in both the Midwest and Great Plains regions. The United States, like the Great Plains region, was almost like, for a while it was desertifying. Like, it was turning into a desert because the land was desolate, because the farmers were like, didn't know proper farming techniques. They had over farmed the land, and the United States became the site of like frequent dust storms. And a lot of the pictures from the Great Depression, you might notice, have a very dusty and grainy sort of aesthetic to them. That's real. That's at the time. That's not like a product of the photography equipment. It really was just dustier and dirtier at that time because there was more dirt, sand, and dust around in the air because of the over farming of the land. So that's really, really relevant to the economic recovery of the United States. And that's something we did learn about in school. Part of the, I guess, some of the striking imagery they used to convey the severity of the Great Depression was the overfarming of the land and the prevalence of dust storms that, actually did kill a lot of people. Executive Order 6102 declared that all privately held gold of American citizens was to be sold to the U.S. Treasury, and the price raised from $20 to $35 per ounce. The goal was to counter the deflation which was paralyzing the economy. Yeah, gold buybacks. I didn't learn any history in school. Yeah, neither do most Americans, but we make do all the same. Look, this is kind of a history lesson right now. This is effectively, this is the history of American social democracy. This is the history that you probably wouldn't have seen in textbooks anyway, because it's the kind of history that politicians and like wealthy business people have been desperately, feverishly trying to unwrite. Roosevelt tried to keep his campaign promise by cutting the federal budget. This included a reduction in military spending from $752 million in 1932 to $531 million in 1934, and a 40% cut in spending on veterans benefits. Not sure I agree with that latter one, but based cutting the Pentagon, fuck the Pentagon, etc. 500,000 veterans and widows were removed from the pension rolls, and benefits were reduced for the remainder. Federal salaries were cut, and spending on research and education was reduced. This is like unequivocally bad. Like that's pretty bad. Especially like, you could defend the cutting of federal salaries. It is pretty damn hard to justify the cutting of veterans benefits and the cuts in spending on research and education. Those are two things that every economist worth their salt will agree. Whatever dollar you spend on research or education, it pays off in spades down the line. Like, these are things that pay for themselves in more ways than one. Not just on the like financial books, but literally in terms of what people contribute materially to society and the world around them. Like, For $1,000, you remember that study about the shrimp on a treadmill, that conservatives were lambasting thousands of dollars for this. Thousands of dollars is nothing for the United States government. Even back at the time that this stuff was happening, even millions of dollars, that's pennies to the American government. And the fact that you can just spend a couple $1,000 and conduct this wacky little experiment that has genuine implications for determining what the effect of certain oceanside settlement or the conditions of the ocean are for aquatic sea creatures that are used to one climate or another. Like, effectively, you've spent $1,000 and you now have policy implications that can benefit millions of people. That is the best fucking $1,000 you will ever spend. Cutting it is a horrid idea. It's bad when Trump and his government do it today. It was bad when Roosevelt and his government did it. It's depressing what they did to Martin Luther King Jr. in history. Oh yeah, they fucking whitewashed his ass real good. They conveniently leave out all the parts where he straight up says, "Yeah, I'm a socialist." The veterans were well organized and strongly protested, so most benefits were restored or increased by 1934. Okay, well, that's good. Veterans groups such as the American Legion and the Veterans of Foreign Wars won their campaign to transform their benefits from payments due in 1945 to immediate cash when Congress overrode the president's veto and passed the Bonus Act in January 1936. So basically, the only time Congress overrode the veto successfully for Roosevelt, it was to do more social democracy. Nice. It pumped sums equal to 2% of the GDP into the consumer economy and had a major stimulus effect. That's pretty good, I think. See, this is more evidence. Congress was like, yeah, what if we just straight up gave money to people? In this case, it's like veterans who wanted their benefits. What if we just straight up gave them money? Massive stimulus effect, big effect on economic recovery. Like, damn. It really is just that simple. On a certain level. That was the first New Deal. Now let's look at the second New Deal. 1935 to 36. This is still before World War II, guys. Roosevelt expected that his party would lose seats in the 1934 congressional elections, as the president's party had done in most previous midterm elections. I feel like this almost doesn't even bear mentioning. Oh, they gained seats instead. Okay, well, in that case, it's worth mentioning. I feel like, given the kind of coalition that Roosevelt built prior to his presidency, I feel like you wouldn't care that much about party lines. I feel like if you were a Democrat or a Republican, just association with Roosevelt would be like a massive W. If you were a liberal, a socialist, a social democrat, even a conservative, because it's like, yes, we're using the government to serve the people, and we're like restoring the American economy to the might that it deserves or something. I don't know. Empowered by the public's vote of confidence, the first item on Roosevelt's agenda in the 74th Congress was the creation of a social insurance program. The Social Security Act established Social Security and promised economic security for the elderly, the poor, and the sick. And the conservatives have been trying their damnedest to kill it ever since. Roosevelt insisted that it should be funded by payroll taxes rather than from the general fund, saying we put those payroll contributions there so as to give the contributors a legal, moral, and political right to collect their pensions and unemployment benefits. With those taxes in there, no damn politician can ever scrap my Social Security program. This is a fucking genius move, because legitimately, it is super hard to just go and scrap Social Security. Yeah, you know all those taxes you've been paying? You don't actually get to see any of that money again. Fuck you, buddy. Like, imagine how that's going to go over. The Republicans have had to, Republicans and Democrats alike, all the conservatives that, jumped on this boat, have had to whittle away, piece by piece, Social Security, because there haven't been any politicians willing to defend it and actually iterate upon it, and because it was so strong from the get-go. Like, FDR knew every good thing that he did, he knew that, like, if anything gets me in political hot water, it's going to be doing this unequivocally good but very large thing. Social Security might be the biggest example of that. Compared with social security systems in Western European countries, the Social Security Act of 1935 was rather conservative, but for the first time, the federal government took responsibility for the economic security of the aged, the temporarily unemployed, dependent children, and disabled people. And to this day, everybody gets a Social Security number. Everybody's eligible for Social Security when they're old enough. Against Roosevelt's original intention for universal coverage, the act excluded farmers, domestic workers, and other groups, which made up about 40% of the labor force. Roosevelt consolidated the various relief organizations through like the Public Works Administration, continued to exist. After winning congressional authorization to further funding for relief efforts, he established the Works Progress Administration. Under the leadership of Harry Hopkins, the WPA employed over 3 million people in its first year of operations. That was a lot back in the day. America was only, about a sixth of the size in terms of population compared to now. It undertook numerous massive construction projects in cooperation with local governments. It also set up the National Youth Administration and arts organizations. Oh yeah, Republicans are also trying to defund the arts nowadays. Conservatives have always hated institutions for the arts because they view the arts as frivolous, but the underlying position is just that they hate individual expression of thought and ideas, and critical thought particularly. So, yet another thing that conservatives have been desperately trying to get rid of and have been cutting since January with this administration. There we go. Now we get to the big one. The National Labor Relations Act guaranteed workers the right to collective bargaining through unions of their own choice. The act also established the National Labor Relations Board to facilitate wage agreements and suppress repeated labor disturbances. The act did not compel employers to reach an agreement with their employees, but it opened possibilities for American labor. The Republicans have straightforwardly been trying to abolish the National Labor Relations Board since Trump got into office in January. And every time they've taken power, they've tried to staff the NLRB with people hostile to organized labor. The result was a tremendous growth in membership in the labor unions, especially in the mass production sector. When the Flint sit-down strike threatened the production of General Motors, Roosevelt broke with the precedent set by many former presidents and refused to intervene. The strike ultimately led to the unionization of both General Motors and its rivals in the American automobile industry. And this is the birth of the most powerful union in America, the United Auto Workers. Because of the NLRA, which established the NLRB and enabled the workers to be like, yeah, you know what, actually, we do have the right to go on strike. And also, massive unionization. This is injecting some of my own analysis here. Mass unionization really contributes to the strength of an economy because the economy is the real economy is that which you can see physically occurring, right? The real goods and services moving around in physical form, that which people need and that which helps people get those needs met, not the fucking financial sector, right? This actually gives leverage. Unionization gives leverage to workers at a certain workplace, whether they be called workers or employees. That's what unions do. And when workers have leverage here, it limits the speed with which wealth can be consolidated. The critique, of course, being that it doesn't alter the fundamental relationship. You still have the working class and the owning class, and economic production is determined very undemocratically. But, it is more democracy than not having unions at all. And that stabilizes the economy because it limits the prevalence of stuff like stock buybacks and wage undercutting and non-compete agreements and that sort of shit. While the first New Deal of 1933 had broad support from most sectors, the second New Deal challenged the business community. Good. Conservative Democrats led by Al Smith fought back with the American Liberty League. Glad to know that American libertarians were already maybe not American libertarians, but, conservatives have always been using liberty to mean I need to have infinite money. Savagely attacking Roosevelt and equating him with socialism. Buddy, unfortunately, this is not true. There's a saying about Franklin Delano Roosevelt that he saved capitalism, and he did. None of what he's done thus far is socialism. Even like soft nationalizing the banks, even if you nationalize the banks, that's still not socialism. None of what Roosevelt has done yet is socialistic. And in fact, I don't think anything that he did could really be seen as socialism unless you're like militantly stupid. Which conservatives are, so I guess, that explains that. But Smith overplayed his hand, and his boisterous rhetoric let Roosevelt isolate his opponents and identify them with the wealthy vested interests that opposed the New Deal, strengthening Roosevelt for the 1936 landslide. The 1936 landslide. Holy shit, that tells you how the election's gonna go. By contrast, labor unions, energized by labor legislation, signed up millions of new members and became a major backer of Roosevelt's re-elections in 1936, 40, and 44. This guy, he really was the American Juan Perón. He only, like, stopped because he died in 45. Juan Perón enjoyed a very similar degree of support from the labor unions and was hated by the business community. Because of, like, very similar social democratic reforms in Argentina. Burns suggests that Roosevelt's policy decisions were guided more by pragmatism than ideology. This is likely true, and that he, quote, was like the general of a guerrilla army whose columns, fighting blindly in the mountains through dense ravines and thickets, suddenly converge, half by plan and half by coincidence, and debouch into the plain below. Roosevelt argued that such apparently haphazard methodology was necessary. The country needs, and unless I mistake its temper, the country demands bold, persistent experimentation, he wrote. It is common sense to take a method and try it. If it fails, admit it frankly and try another. Democrats are fucking allergic to this. And Republicans use this tactic in service of evil, basically. They've had some flops. Republicans have had some flops, rhetorically and legislatively, but that doesn't stop them. Democrats barely even try anymore. And Roosevelt was like, yeah, what if I'm like super based and want to try doing like good shit, but like sometimes I think something's good shit and it doesn't work out. You just be like, okay, that didn't work. Let's try something else that will be good shit. And this is actually a really good way to keep political momentum. In fact, in a way, it kind of uses social memory being very short to its advantage, this strategy. Imagine for a moment you are a modern Roosevelt, insofar as your ability to use media to reach people. You're employing the Insta, TikTok, grind set presidential strategy. Post about some shit every day until it happens. Use that media outreach to galvanize people in support of your political vision for the country, to put pressure on Congress, because now people are going to go to their congressperson and be like, hey, why haven't you done this thing that the president's talking about yet? Right? And you do that in service of social democratic reforms. If one of those doesn't work, even though you spent all that time working on it, you can literally just say, we're moving on to this other thing. That works. And people will be like, okay, it didn't work. And even if they're like, I'm not sure about this one, Chief, they will see like the benefits continue to roll in from successful policy rollouts of shit like, the NLRA. Like, imagine the modern sort of analog to that. Maybe a national tenant relations act, like guarantees the right to tenant organizing, tenant unions, right? The election of 1936. 8 million workers remained unemployed in 1936, and though economic conditions had improved since 32, they remained sluggish. By 1936, Roosevelt had lost the backing he once held in the business community because of his support for the NLRB and the Social Security Act. Big fucking surprise there, am I right, guys? The Republicans had few alternative candidates and nominated Kansas Governor Alf Landon, a little-known bland candidate whose chances were damaged by the public reemergence of the still unpopular Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover's like, I got one more left in me. And then they were like, no, you don't, idiot. While Roosevelt campaigned on his New Deal programs and continued to attack Hoover, Landon sought to win voters who approved of the goals of the New Deal, but disagreed with his implementation. A great strategy. Literally, Landon was like doing what the Democrats nowadays try to do. You know, I'm like the other guys, but I have some principled disagreements with the way they're trying to do things. Literally, this was that from the other side of things. The conservatives tried to run somebody who was like, you know, this New Deal thing is pretty okay. You know, the thing that has FDR's name written all over it. But, you know, I disagree with some of the implementations. Vote for me, by the way. and as you can guess, looking at this electoral map, nobody fucking voted for Alf Landon. An attempt by Louisiana Senator Huey Long, another Juan Perón in American history, to organize a left-wing third party collapsed after Long's assassination in 1935. The remnants, helped by Father Charles Coughlin, supported William Lemke of the newly formed Union Party. Oh, so this was a socialist party. Interesting. That Huey Long created a party called the Share Our Wealth Party. To stimulate the economy, the Share Our Wealth program called for massive federal spending, a wealth tax, and wealth redistribution. These proposals drew wide support, with millions joining local Share Our Wealth clubs. Roosevelt adopted many of these proposals in the Second New Deal. So, unironically, this bit player third party was more relevant to like mid to late 1930s politics in America than the Republicans were. Which is really funny, because the Republicans in this moment kind of chose laissez-faire liberalism again, and then like the Union Party was like, no, fuck that, we need socialism. And FDR kind of leaned into some of the messaging of like people who would be more Huey Long types, even though he himself was not socialist. Roosevelt won renomination with little opposition at the 1936 DNC, while his allies overcame Southern resistance to abolish the long-established rule that required Democratic presidential candidates to win the votes of two-thirds of the delegates rather than a simple majority. In the election against Landon and the third-party candidate, Roosevelt won 60.8% of the vote and carried every state except Maine and Vermont. The Democratic ticket won the highest proportion of the popular vote. Democrats expanded their majorities in Congress, controlling over 3/4 of the seats in each house. The election also saw the consolidation of the New Deal coalition. While the Democrats lost some of their traditional allies in big business, they were replaced by groups such as organized labor and African Americans, the latter of whom voted Democratic for the first time since the Civil War. Roosevelt lost high-income voters, especially businessmen and professionals. Yeah, but there's like not that many of them because they're high income. That's like kind of what high income means, is not very many of them. But made major gains among the poor and minorities. Literally the reverse of what the modern Democratic strategy is. We will sacrifice our support among very wealthy people to gain very numerous, very real supporters in poor and minority communities. Whereas nowadays, if you guys will recall, Chuck Schumer has openly stated in his book that the Democrats will sacrifice willingly very real support that they enjoy from the poor and minorities to gain not real, but imaginary support from wealthy conservatives. I'm not making this up. He's literally said that in his book, like, you know, when I think about campaigning strategy and who am I trying to appeal to, I imagine a wealthy, like, upper middle class family of, like, from New Jersey or something. From the New Jersey suburbs or something like that. And it's like, wow. So you literally, your political instincts are like, let me imagine my idealized fictitious version of, like, a wealthy, like, semi-wealthy conservative in my head. And that's who I'm trying to appeal to. Roosevelt said, yeah, fuck those guys, both in your brain and in real life. Friendship ended with the business community. The poor and minorities are my best friend now. He won 86% of the Jewish vote, 81% of Catholics, 80% of union members, 76% of Southerners, 76% of blacks in northern cities, and 75% of people on relief. Roosevelt carried 102 of the country's 106 cities with a population of 100,000 or more. Almost every single big city voted for him. That's fucking wild. Also, that like all of this shit, all of the coalition building that's occurring here is what Republicans have tried to do, but basically in reverse. The Republicans actually built a pretty broad-based coalition of working class and wealthy people by like lying to the working class and like whipping up reactionary fervor and shit, when FDR built a way stronger coalition. This is something like a lesson we need to take for today, that like FDR built a way stronger coalition by basically saying fuck the business community. He united the entire country by saying fuck the business community, fuck wealthy voters, fuck the upper middle class. The poor and minorities are my homies now. I'm going to support unions. I'm going to do all this other shit, because that signals to people that you actually believe in that shit, right? If like, it's one thing to say like, oh yeah, you know, support the unions or something. It's another thing to be so consistent in your support for organized labor and for, you know, people generally, that like you actually alienate the most evil people in society. Democrats are unwilling to alienate anybody, but in doing so, they alienate everybody. You know? Meanwhile, Republicans are perfectly comfortable with alienating the poor and minorities, but paradoxically, in so doing, they gain a lot of support from the poor and minorities. Because they all imagine, oh, well, you know, damn, that's so true. He's so right. People of my race are actually massive shitheads or something. I'm gonna vote for him because he's just like me for real. Now we get to the Supreme Court fight and second term legislation. The Supreme Court became Roosevelt's primary domestic focus during his second term after the court overturned many of his programs, including the NIRA. The more conservative members of the court upheld the principles of the Lochner era, which saw numerous economic regulations struck down on the basis of freedom of contract. So basically, these guys are like the modern day libertarians, like air quotes libertarians, is that they probably wouldn't have called themselves that, because people who called themselves libertarians at this time would have been socialists. But they're very similar to like modern ANCAPs, because they would have been like, oh yeah, infinite freedom for businesses to form contracts that fuck you raw. No freedom for workers. Thank you. Infinite freedom to poison the water supply and like shoot you if you go on strike or something. I don't know. Roosevelt proposed the Judicial Procedures Reform Bill of 1937, which would have allowed him to appoint an additional justice for each incumbent justice over the age of 70. In 1937, there were 6 Supreme Court justices over the age of 70. The size of the court had been set at 9 since the passage of the Judiciary Act of 1869, and Congress had altered the number of justices to 6 over the number of justices 6 other times, throughout American history. Roosevelt's court packing plan ran into intense political opposition from his own party, led by Vice President Garner, since it upset the separation of powers. A bipartisan coalition of liberals and conservatives of both parties opposed the bill, and Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes broke with precedent by publicly advocating the defeat of the bill. Any chance of passing the bill ended with the death of Senate Majority Leader Joseph Taylor Robinson in July of 1937. This is probably one of the most well-known controversies of the Roosevelt administration, that he tried to pack the courts. Hot take, that's based actually. Having a Supreme Court that's like packed is pretty good actually. I don't think it's good that like 9 high priests of law can just fucking determine that shit. However, this is also like strongman behavior, trying to stack the courts in a way that favors your policy objectives. The difference is Roosevelt's policy objectives are, what if I did like the New Deal and also every worker joins a workers union and has the right to go on strike and shit. You know, And also like massive public works projects. Like, what if we actually acknowledge that the business community is like one guy, Juan guy, and that, like, everybody else is a worker, and like we start, I don't know, taxing the Juan guy more so that they can like eat. Many such cases, starting with the 1937 case of West Coast Hotel Company versus Parrish, court began to take a more favorable view of economic regulations. Historians have described this as the switch in time that saved nine. I've literally never heard this. I think that they just made that up, but okay. That same year, Roosevelt appointed a Supreme Court justice for the very first time, and by 1941 had appointed 7 of the court's 9 justices. After Parrish, the court shifted its focus from judicial review of economic regulations back to the protection of civil liberties. 4 of Roosevelt's Supreme Court appointees, Felix Frankfurter, Robert Jackson, Hugo Black, and William O. Douglas, were particularly influential in reshaping the jurisprudence of the court. Okay. I do not care about court jurisprudence. With Roosevelt's influence on the wane following the failure of the 1937 bill, conservative Democrats joined with Republicans to block the implementation of further New Deal programs. Roosevelt did manage to pass some. See, this is what I mean when I say, like, your job as a person is I want good things to happen, and these people's job as politicians is fuck you. I don't want good things to happen. You know? The government's, like, your job is to advocate for good things, and the government's job is not to give those good things to you. Such as statecraft, I guess. Roosevelt did manage to pass some legislation, including the Housing Act of 1937, sometimes called the Wagner-Steagall Act. Provided subsidies to be paid from the U.S. federal government to local public housing agencies. Oh, how about that? I bet Republicans want to get rid of this too if they could find it. Although, I mean, maybe they might just get rid of this quietly, and who knows? They're already getting rid of Section 8. Like, Section 8 is federal affordable housing. This is federally subsidized local affordable housing. I feel like it's just one step away before they start targeting this as well. Maybe they let things cool off after they get rid of Section 8 a little bit. But yeah. Second Agricultural Adjustment Act, and the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. Oh yeah, this set the 40-hour work week standard. Yeah, look at that. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 is a U.S. labor law that creates the right to a minimum wage and time and a half overtime pay when people work over 40 hours a week. It also prohibits the employment of minors in, quote, oppressive child labor. It applies to employees engaged in interstate commerce or employed by an enterprise engaged in commerce or in the production of goods for commerce, unless the employer can claim an exemption from coverage. So when you see exempt or non-exempt, it's referring to the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. The act was enacted by the 75th Congress and signed into law by President Roosevelt in 1938. And Republicans want to get rid of this too. Not necessarily by name. I don't know if they've named the Fair Labor Standards Act as a boogeyman. It's kind of hard to say, like, oh yeah, we shouldn't have fair labor standards. Like, great, cool. But Republicans have been vehemently against the raising of the minimum wage. In fact, many of them have come out to say, like, we shouldn't even have a minimum wage at all. And state-level Republicans' economic identity is almost entirely determined by a long-standing struggle for them to re-implement child labor, to basically funnel kids out of the education system because they hate you, and they hate children, and they hate everybody. And a lot of the, I should mention also, a lot of labor crackdowns, organized labor crackdowns, have sort of revolved around the exempt or non-exempt status of certain employees. I believe it in some way pertains to forming a union, but a lot of the political winds post-FDR have been sort of favorable to the inclusion of more types of employment to the exempt status of the Fair Labor Standards Act, to such an extent where, like, it almost doesn't make sense how many jobs are in the exempt category. It's like, oh wow, you work as like I don't know, you work as an office worker, congratulations, you're exempt from labor standards. Like, how the fuck does that work? Oh, it says here, okay. FLSA outlawed child labor, established a federal minimum wage, and required overtime pay for certain employees who work in excess of 40 hours a week. All things that Republicans hate by name, with the exception of this last one. I don't know if they've taken such. No, actually, Republicans hate this one too, because I think Joe Biden's administration raised like the cap on overtime pay eligibility, and Republicans made kind of a stink about it. They don't like any of this. He also passed the Reorganization Act of 1939. And subsequently created the Executive Office of the President, making it the nerve center of the federal administrative system. So basically, he expanded the administrative capacities of the executive branch of government because, like, keep in mind, this shit was all FDR doing it himself, basically. Like, sure, there was a lot of people even then that worked under the U.S. president, but, like, a lot of the agencies that are big names now, the fucking EPA and well, I guess the office of the president, as it says right here, and like a lot of the sort of press facing elements, all of that was absent. He was like, in many ways, Roosevelt was kind of a one man show. When the economy began to deteriorate again mid-1937, oh, really? There's a recession in 37, 38? Roosevelt launched a rhetorical campaign against big business and monopoly power, alleging the recession was the result of a capital strike and even ordering the Federal Bureau of Investigation to look for a criminal conspiracy. They found none. Not surprising, because a lot of times, like, capital doesn't quite engage in stuff that can be deemed as criminal conspiracy, because sometimes the law explicitly protects what they're doing, but oftentimes it's like it's just a happenstance of them pursuing their interests, which is legal. He then asked Congress for $5 billion, equivalent to $109 billion today, in relief and public works funding. This created as many as 3.3 million WPA jobs by 1938. Projects accomplished under the WPA range from new federal courthouses and post offices to facilities and infrastructure for national parks, bridges, and other infrastructure across the country, and architectural surveys and archaeological excavations, investments to construct facilities and preserve important resources. All more shit that Republicans don't like because they don't want to fund infrastructure of any kind. A lot of people at this time didn't have access to, like, mail. Like, that was a city thing. If you lived in the city, then it meant you lived the good life. And by live the good life, I mean had access to a mailbox. Beyond this, however, Roosevelt recommended to a special congressional session only a permanent National Farm Act, administrative reorganization, and regional planning measures, all of which were leftovers from a regular session. According to Burns, this attempt illustrated Roosevelt's inability to settle on a basic economic program. Citation fucking needed? Great, thank you. According to Burns, I don't know who this Burns guy is. I don't think this guy likes Roosevelt very much. Maybe. Determined to overcome the opposition of conservative Democrats in Congress, Roosevelt became involved in the 1938 Democratic primaries, actively campaigning for challengers who were more supportive of New Deal reform. Roosevelt failed badly, managing to defeat only one of the 10 targeted. That's unfortunate. In the November 38 elections, Democrats lost 6 Senate seats and 71 House seats, with losses concentrated among pro-New Deal Democrats. When Congress reconvened in 1939, Republicans under Senator Robert Taft formed a conservative coalition with Southern Democrats, virtually ending Roosevelt's ability to enact his domestic proposals. Despite their opposition to Roosevelt's domestic policies, many of these conservative congressmen would provide crucial support for his foreign policy before and during World War II. These would be the early neoconservatives. Conservation and the environment. So basically that, like, it's kind of wild that, like, the moment conservatives take any semblance of power, good stuff stops happening with like Roosevelt being president, but like also elsewise as well. Conservation and the environment. Roosevelt had a lifelong interest in the environment and conservation, starting with his youthful interest in forestry on his family estate. Although he was never an outdoorsman or sportsman on Theodore Roosevelt's scale, the two were cousins, I believe. His growth of the national systems was comparable. When Roosevelt was governor of New York, the Temporary Emergency Relief Administration was essentially a state-level predecessor of the Federal Civilian Conservation Corps, with 10,000 or more men building fire trails, combating soil erosion, and planting tree seedlings in marginal farmland in New York. As president, Roosevelt was active in expanding, funding, and promoting the national park and national forest systems. Their popularity soared from 3 million visitors a year at the start of the decade to 15.5 million in 1939. The Civilian Conservation Corps enrolled 3.4 million young men and built 13,000 miles, 21,000 kilometers of trails, planted 2 billion trees, and upgraded 125,000 miles, or 201,000 kilometers, of dirt roads. Every state had its own state parks, and Roosevelt made sure that the WPA and CCC projects were set up to upgrade them as well as the national systems. GNP and unemployment rates. Government spending increased from 8% of the gross national product under Hoover in 1932 to 10.2% in 1936. That's actually a big increase considering that the gross national product would have itself grown in that time period. The national debt as a percentage of the GNP had more than doubled under Hoover from 16% to 40% of the GNP in early 1933. It held steady to close to 40% as late as fall 1941, then grew rapidly during the war. Wars tend to do that. The GNP was 34% higher in 36 than in 32, and 58% higher in 1940 on the eve of the war. That is, the economy grew from 58% from 32 to 40, then grew 56% from 40 to 45 in 5 years of wartime. One thing that is unavoidable is that, like, spending money does in fact mean spending money. But, like, if you're spending money on shit that pays off in the future, then debt is like a non-issue. And war also tends to put countries in debt because the war machine is a non-productive use of money. It is quite literally an anti-productive use of money. War is where money goes to be non-productive, to be diverted away from productive things. Unemployment fell dramatically during Roosevelt's first term. It increased in 1938, depression within a depression, but continually declined after 1938. Total unemployment during Roosevelt's term expanded. Total employment, during Roosevelt's term expanded by 18.31 million jobs, with an average annual increase in jobs during his administration of 5.3%. Although still, remember, this is social democracy. This is still capitalism. So full employment still wasn't reached, nor was it possible. These are different unemployment scales. Yeah, look at this fucking unemployment rate in 1932 and 3. And then it kind of fluctuates. You know what, though? I think the unemployment rate at the time was more reflective of how many people were actually out of a job or actually couldn't make ends meet, because underemployment wouldn't become a thing for some time, if that makes sense. Like, this was before uh uh so much chicanery, I guess, was introduced into the measuring of unemployment, and so many qualifiers were added that it basically gave companies a million loopholes with which to, like, skirt having people included as part of that statistic, you know? That's the really relevant stuff of Roosevelt's presidency, I think. He kind of was like America's Juan Perón. That's a really nice portrait. Oh yeah, of course he did also order with the infamous Executive Order 9066. Americans will actually know this one. Uh, uh, yeah, he relocated Japanese Americans, both citizens and immigrants, forced them to liquidate properties and businesses, and in turn, they were interned in hastily built camps in interior, harsh locations. Yeah, this was really bad. But notably, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of the executive order in the 1944 case of Korematsu versus United States. So, shout outs to governments for doing shitty things, but shout outs to Roosevelt for all doing a bunch of good things too. And the good things are all the things that Republicans hate him for, and Democrats too. Basically, everybody hated him for being giga based and having a chiseled jawline and being like every man a king, except I'm not Huey Long. Not really. We get into the course of World War II there, but yeah, that's those are all the programs. Those are a lot of the things from FDR's terms in office. Basically, when I say that the United States is coasting along on the remnants of FDR's success, that's what I mean. The sort of economic and social and civil programs established by the Roosevelt administration have carried America through the 20th century, and conservatives have spent their entire political careers and tenures and lives trying to undermine and get rid of the things that are keeping America afloat. And it's like it's fucking we're hanging on by a thread from this shit that was happening over 80 years ago. Seriously. Now I want to look a little bit at Lyndon Johnson, who was a senator before he was president. Let's see the campaigns of 1960. Uh, yeah, okay. Vice presidency and then the presidency. Lyndon Johnson was sworn in as president shortly after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. That's how he became president, and then he was, I believe, reelected. Yeah, he was reelected when the next series of elections came around. But this is the presidential administration that is responsible for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and Medicare and Medicaid, as well as I think the Pell Grants. I could be wrong on that last one, but we'll see. Succession. President Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, November 63, in Dallas, Texas. Later that day, Johnson took the presidential oath of office aboard Air Force One. Johnson was convinced of the need to make an immediate show of the transition of power after the assassination to provide stability to a grieving nation. He and the Secret Service, not knowing whether the assassin acted alone or as broader conspiracy, felt compelled to return rapidly to D.C. This was greeted by some with assertions that he was in too much haste to assume power. I mean, the country was kind of without a president. That's kind of how shit has to work. He was the vice president. That's just how the line of succession goes. In response to the public demand, answers in the growing number of conspiracy theories, Johnson established a commission headed by Chief Justice Earl Warren, known as the Warren Commission, to investigate the assassination. The commission conducted extensive research and hearings that unanimously concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in the assassination. U.S. Marine veteran and Marxist activist. There's still a lot of conspiracy theories about this one. Also, another mentally ill individual. It's kind of funny that, like, it used to be that there were a lot of leftists that were mentally ill enough to assassinate a politician, and now that's, like, almost exclusively delegated to the right. The past 2 presidential assassination attempts, actually the past 3, have all been on Trump, and they've all been by registered Republicans, which is really funny. Let's see, taxation and budget. Yeah, this is like these are the big these are the big things. Oh wow, the Fair Housing Act, the War on Poverty. All right, ooh, there's a bunch here. Taxation and budget. Let's see. Quickly pursue one of Kennedy's primary legislative goals: a tax cut. Boo! Fuck tax cuts. Revenue Act. Cut the top marginal tax rate from 91 to 70%. This is kind of foreshadowing. This is the beginning of neoliberalism, I believe, and the kind of era of tax cuts and privatization and shit. But there was kind of some ideological conflict, even internally, between this and social democracy, and the use of the state to combat things like income inequality and poverty. So let's start with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. On November 27th of 63, Johnson delivered his Let Us Continue speech to Congress, saying that no memorial, oration, or eulogy could more eloquently honor President Kennedy's memory than the earliest possible passage of the Civil Rights Bill for which he fought so long. The wave of national grief following the assassination gave enormous momentum to Johnson's promise to carry out Kennedy's plans. Yeah, Kennedy was pro-civil rights, and so Johnson basically used that to say, like, look, you wouldn't disgrace Kennedy's memory by not passing the Civil Rights Bill into law. You wouldn't download a car. You wouldn't desecrate the legacy of John F. President by not doing the Civil Rights Act. Johnson asked Robert Kennedy to spearhead the undertaking on Capitol Hill. This is Robert Kennedy Sr. This is actually the cool one. This provided adequate political cover for Johnson should the effort fail, but if it were successful, Johnson would receive ample credit. So, pretty adept at political maneuvering here. Biographer Caro notes that the bill Kennedy had submitted was facing the same tactics that prevented the passage of civil rights bills in the past. Southern congressmen and senators, this was still like kind of a sectional divide in politics, used congressional procedure to prevent it from coming to a vote. Very much the same thing that Congress people do nowadays. In particular, they held up all the major bills Kennedy had proposed and that were considered urgent, especially the tax reform bill, to force the bill's supporters to pull it. For Johnson's civil rights bill to reach the House floor for a vote, the president needed to find a way to circumvent Representative Howard W. Smith. This guy looks like a racist old coot. Oh, and he's from my state too, Virginia. Great. Chairman of the House Rules Committee. Johnson used a discharge petition to force it onto the House floor. Damn, who knew that? The president actually can, in fact, do things, contrary to what modern Democrats will tell you. Like, modern Democrats will tell you that the rules are absolute and therefore we can't do anything good. And Republicans will tell you that, like, we're going to kill everyone. I don't care what the rules say. Facing a growing threat, they would be bypassed. The Rules Committee approved the bill and moved it to the floor of the full House, which soon passed it by a vote of 290 to 110. A much more comfortable margin than civil rights legislation has been passed by since. Johnson convinced Senate Majority Leader Mike Mansfield to put the House bill directly into consideration by the full Senate, bypassing the Senate Judiciary Committee and its segregationist chairman, James Eastland. Damn! Fucking liberals used to, like, have balls sometimes. Since bottling up the civil rights bill in the committee was no longer an option, the anti-civil rights senators were left with the filibuster as their only remaining tool. Overcoming the filibuster required the support of at least 20 Republicans who were growing less supportive because their party was about to nominate for president a candidate who opposed the bill. According to Caro, Johnson ultimately could convince Republican leader Everett Dirksen to support the bill that amassed the necessary Republican votes to overcome the filibuster in March of 64. The bill passed the Senate by a vote of 71 to 29, and it was signed into law on July 2nd of 1964. The act outlawed discrimination based on race, color, national origin, religion, or sex. It prohibited racial segregation in public accommodations and employment discrimination, and strengthened the federal government's power to investigate racial and gender employment discrimination. The following evening, Johnson told aide Bill Moyers, "I think we may have lost the South for your lifetime and mine," anticipating backlash from Southern whites against Johnson's Democratic Party. And he was right. This effectively cemented kind of the party switch along sectional lines at the very least, but definitely polarized the more conservative-leaning Republican Party into conservatism and racism, and the Democratic Party into, like, milquetoast, non-racist liberalism, basically. And he used a ton of institutional trickery to actually treat this bill with the fucking urgency it deserves, where, again, Democrats will treat the rules today as if they're absolute and unchangeable because they don't want to fucking do anything. Now we get to the Great Society. By early 1964, Johnson had begun to use the name Great Society to describe his domestic program. Johnson's Great Society program encompassed movements of urban renewal, modern transportation, clean environment, anti-poverty, healthcare reform, crime control, and educational reform. To ensure the passage of his programs, Johnson placed an unprecedented emphasis on relations with Congress. Back when Congress, like, kind of did shit. Voting Rights Act of 1965. Soon after the 1964 election, civil rights orgs such as the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee began a push for federal action to protect the voting rights of racial minorities. On March 7, 1965, these organizations began the Selma to Montgomery marches, in which Selma residents proceeded to march to Alabama's capital, Montgomery, to highlight voting rights issues and present Governor George Wallace. This is the segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever guy. That's this guy with their grievances. On the first march, demonstrators were stopped by state and county police, who shot tear gas into the crowd and trampled protesters. Televised footage of the scene, which came known as Bloody Sunday, generated outrage across the country. In response to the rapidly increasing political pressure upon him, Johnson decided to immediately send voting rights legislation to Congress and to address the American people in a speech before a joint session of Congress. Yeah, okay, it's worth mentioning, by the way, these civil rights protests were treated very much the same way that modern BLM protests or modern pro-Palestine protests are today. That is to say that actually more, it would be more like the BLM protests, except less favorable. The American public and the American government and the American media did not like these protests. But the fact remained, there were a lot of Americans that did approve of the protests and that were part of these protest movements, and that was capable of putting enough pressure on government authorities to pass this legislation. In fact, the reason that such pressure existed at all is because they were peacefully marching for their rights, and the government basically cracked down on them with no evidence of any violence being committed from the part of the protesters. That narrative kind of fell flat because there was no footage of protesters being violent, but there was plenty of footage of cops being violent. It's kind of like the strategy that if you're part of a protest movement, you kind of just need to walk, like, just face first into the cops' fists and batons and let the nation be horrified. Although this is a strategy that might not even work nowadays because the media control is so much more overwhelming now than it used to be. You know? I don't know. Look, I'm actually not as confident in my analysis of what makes protest movements successful anymore because of that. But I do know that an overwhelming demonstration of like numbers, support in numbers, is regardless very useful, because it shows like a big dissonance between like support for the policy on the ground, you know, in this case the Voting Rights Act, and like the opposition in government. Does that make sense? Kind of like how, you know, there was no real violence or necessarily threat of violent action from the Pride Parade in Budapest in Hungary, but nonetheless, it did demonstrate that there was overwhelming public support for queer rights, even if it like wasn't necessarily an outright majority of Hungarians. It was enough Hungarians that cared enough to show up in a big crowd that it sent the message: if you're going to crack down on queer rights, you are going to have to go through us, all of us. You know? So this is his address to Congress. I actually don't care that much about that. Johnson and Dirksen established a strong bipartisan alliance in favor of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, precluding the possibility of a Senate filibuster defeating the bill. In August of 65, the House approved the bill by a vote of 333 to 85, and the Senate passed it by a vote of 79 to 18. The landmark legislation outlawed discrimination in voting, thus allowing millions of Southern blacks to vote for the first time. Yeah, previously there were like poll taxes, quote unquote literacy tests, grandfather clauses. If your grandfather could vote, then you could vote. If your grandfather couldn't vote, then you couldn't vote. Many black people's grandparents would have been slaves or immediate freedmen who could not vote. The results were significant. Between the years of 1968 and 1980, the number of Southern black elected state and federal office holders nearly doubled. In Mississippi, the voter registration rate of African Americans rose from 6.7% to 59.8% between 1964 and 67. Yeah, that's how bad Jim Crow was. Less than 10% of black people in, well, I guess this example is the state of Mississippi, but I'm assuming this number would have been pretty similar throughout other southern states, were registered to vote. And then, like, after the passage of the Voting Rights Act, it basically rose to more or less reflect the registration numbers of other groups in America. After the murder of civil rights worker Viola Liuzzo, Johnson went on television to announce the arrest of 4 KKK members, men implicated in her death. He angrily denounced the Klan as a hooded society of bigots and warned them to return to a decent society before it's too late. Johnson was the first president to arrest and prosecute members of the Klan since Ulysses S. Grant. Based? He turned to themes of Christian redemption to push for civil rights. This was one of the last eras where the rhetoric of Christianity was used almost unanimously for progressive causes. You know, the language of God. This is why, like, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and then Malcolm X, these people were also religious figures. And they used very religious language to argue in favor of a progressive agenda. It was a slight to the ultimate divine power of God that black people are oppressed because we're all children of God or something. There's an argument there. But, you know, there was like a conservative religious, like, quote unquote revolution in the 1970s and particularly 80s, where now, like, religiosity is much more slanted towards the right wing, which I think is like kind of its natural inclination because of the degree of superstition that's involved in religion, but I don't know. Well, I mean, I do know that, like, superstition lets religion lean in that way, but again, opiate of the masses type shit. He turned it, mobilized support from churches. At the Howard University commencement address on June 4th, 1965, he said both the government and the nation needed to help achieve these goals. To shatter forever not only the barriers of law and public practice, but the walls which bound the condition of many by the color of his skin. To dissolve as best we can the antique enmities of the heart which diminish the holder. Divide the great democracy and do wrong, great wrong, to the children of God. See the pre-read. There it is. It's like it's a slight to the will of God that his children be discriminated against by each other or something like that. Now we get to the Fair Housing Act. See also Civil Rights Act of 1968. Oh, wow. The Fair Housing Act, a component of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, outlawed several forms of housing discrimination, probably redlining being among them, and effectively allowed many African Americans to move to the suburbs. That's really fucking ironic. I'm sorry. Like, the suburbs were created so that white people could escape the city and not have to live around black people. And I love that the trend here was that like suburbia was already out of the bag. So it's like now black people also get to do white flight. They made white flight woke or something. Johnson submitted a bill to Congress in April 1966 that barred house owners from refusing to enter into agreements on the basis of race. The bill immediately garnered opposition from many of the Northerners who had supported the last two major civil rights bills. Oh, this is a bridge too far for the fucking limousine liberals, eh? Not allowed to discriminate against black people in housing anymore? We actually have to live with them? Nah, okay, that's a bridge too far. Damn. Though a version of the bill passed the House, it failed to win Senate approval, marking Johnson's first major legislative defeat. The law gained new impetus after the April 4th, 1968 assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil unrest across the country that followed. The bill passed Congress on April 10th. It was quickly signed into law by Johnson. This was another one of those stopgap measures that it was like aimed at sort of quelling national like uproar. I mean, I guess it kind of outlines that, right? But like a lot of what FDR did was in recognition that after something like the Depression, capitalism was eating itself alive, and that like people will start to direct their anger at the business community, at the actors that are directly responsible for the system being in tatters. And the objective here is not to transcend the system, but repair it as best they can. But it's still, at the end of the day, the same system. Does that make sense? Like, I've read a little bit on the widespread protests in the 1960s and like leading up to the 70s, and it's pretty clear, even just looking at a glance, that with revolutionary groups running around like the Black Panthers and like an increasing number of overtly socialist groups, even with Red Scare stuff going on, that the United States was witnessing unprecedented civil unrest that could have even led to a revolution eventually, if the government remained a certain degree of tone deaf. And depending on how accelerationist you want to be, this might have been the worst outcome of the two. But regardless, it did force the government to adopt some uncharacteristically progressive reforms. One of which being the Fair Housing Act, which said that like, yeah, no, you can't discriminate like based on race who you're going to rent this apartment to or who you're going to sell this house to. And notably, like this paragraph mentions, a lot of northern whites who were previously like the vanguard of liberal progressivism were like, whoa, hey, now that's a bridge too far. The war on poverty. And then healthcare reform is the last well, let's see. Funding for education. I think the funding for education is where I want to stop, because that's what I want to highlight about the successes that America is still coasting on and that the conservatives have been trying to drain away as long as they've, been in the discussion. War on poverty. In his 1964 State of the Union address, Johnson stated, "This administration, today, here and now, declares an unconditional war on poverty in America. Our aim is not only to relieve the symptoms of poverty, but to cure it, above all, prevent it." In April of 64, Johnson proposed the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964, which would create the Office of Economic Opportunity to oversee local community action agencies charged with dispensing aid to those in poverty. Each CAA was required to have maximum feasible participation from local residents who would design and operate anti-poverty programs unique to their community's needs. This was threatening local political regimes who saw CAAs as alternative power structures in their own communities, funded and encouraged by the OEO. Legitimately, I feel like this might have led to socialism eventually. And I feel like they were right to feel threatened by that, insofar as they were detecting a threat to local political machines, but they were wrong to feel threatened by it in the sense that this is like a good thing and would do good things. Like, oh no, I'm threatened by the prospect of people being lifted out of poverty. Maybe fucking reevaluate your position if that's a thing that makes you feel threatened. In 1967, the Green Amendment gave city governments the right to decide which entity would be the official CAA for their community. The net result was to halt the citizen participation reform movement. Well, that's fucked up. Yeah, wait a minute. This is socialism. Hold up. Lyndon Johnson accidentally discovers socialism in his quest to cure poverty, makes every single local government fucking mad. And it's all based around the concept of citizen participation in their communities, finding ways to best combat poverty. And local governments are like, nah, I don't know about that one, chief. Damn. This isn't generally what this stream is about right now, but like I'm kind of mad that this was over before it started. Damn. The Economic Opportunity Act created the Job Corps and AmeriKKA Vista. Oh yeah, I know these guys. A domestic version of the Peace Corps. Modeled after the Civilian Conservation Corps, Job Corps was a residential education and job training program that provided academic and vocational skills to low-income, at-risk young people. Vista deployed volunteers on community projects across the nation to address issues such as illiteracy, inadequate housing, and poor health. By the end of 1965, 2,000 volunteers had signed on. The act reflected Johnson's belief that the government could best help the impoverished by providing them with economic opportunities. Basic, like, social democracy, completely breaking the minds of conservatives and liberals alike yet again. And by social democracy, I mean both capitalist social democracy and social-democracy, like, of the type that Rosa Luxemburg would support. During the Johnson administration, national poverty declined significantly, with the percentage of Americans living below the poverty line dropping from 23 to 12%. Johnson took an additional step in the war on poverty with an urban renewal effort, the Demonstration Cities Program. To be eligible, a city was required to demonstrate its readiness to, quote, arrest blight and decay and make a substantial impact on the development of its entire city. Johnson requested an investment of $400 million per year, totaling $2.4 billion. In late 1966, Congress passed a substantially reduced program costing $900 million, which Johnson later called the Model Cities Program. The New York Times wrote 22 years later that the program was largely a failure. I wonder what the New York Times thought of this program when they were still asking for the $400 million per year. I wonder what position they possibly could have taken about this solution to income inequality and proposal of urban renewal that Congress passed down a very characteristically watered down version of. I fucking hate the New York Times so much. Healthcare reform. Johnson's initial effort to improve healthcare was the creation of the Commission on Heart Disease, Cancer, and Strokes. These diseases accounted for 71% of the nation's deaths in 1962. That's fucking wild. In 1965, Johnson turned his focus on hospital insurance for the aged under Social Security. The key player in initiating this program, named Medicare, was Representative Wilbur Mills, chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. To reduce Republican opposition, Mills suggested that Medicare be fashioned as 3 layers: hospital insurance under Social Security, a voluntary insurance program for doctors' visits, and an expanded medical welfare program for the poorest known as Medicaid. The bill passed the House by a margin of 110 votes on April 8th. The effort in the Senate was considerably more complicated, but the Medicare bill passed Congress on July 28th. Medicare now covers tens of millions of Americans. Not anymore! This is a big part of the Johnson administration's legacy. The Affordable Housing Programs, the Civil and Voting Rights Act, and the fucking Medicare bill, which is now law, which established Medicare, Medicaid, and insurance based off of Social Security, I believe. And of course, Medicare and Medicaid have been gutted by the big beautiful bill. Just the latest in the attempts to chip away at these programs. The Sweeping Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 reformed the country's immigration system, repealed the national origins formula, which had restricted immigration from countries outside of Western Europe and the Western Hemisphere. The annual rate of inflow doubled between 1965 and 70 and doubled again by 1990, with dramatic increases from Asia and Latin America, including Mexico. This is probably really slept on, how much this contributes to the economic leverage that America currently holds with its labor force. So much of the economic base of this country is because of immigrants that came here from more dire economic circumstances. Like, that is where we largely owe our population growth to. Federal funding for education. And this will be the last one. Johnson, whose own ticket out of poverty was a public education in Texas, believed that education was an essential component of the American dream, especially for minorities. He made education the top priority of the Great Society agenda, with an emphasis on helping poor children. Buoyed by his landslide victory in the 1964 election, in early 65, Johnson proposed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA, which would double federal spending on education from $4 billion to $8 billion. That was fucking huge. The bill quickly passed both houses of Congress by wide margins. ESEA increased funding to all school districts, but directed more money going to districts that had large proportions of students from poor families. Although ESEA solidified Johnson's support among K-12 teachers' unions, neither the Higher Education Act nor the new endowments mollified the college professors and students, growing increasingly uneasy with the war in Vietnam. So the higher education system comes into play here. Johnson's second major education program, was the Higher Education Act of 1965, which increased federal money given to universities, created scholarships, gave low-interest loans to students, and established a teacher corps. Johnson also established Head Start, an early education program to help prepare children from disadvantaged families for success in public schools. Hello, Lapis 169. What are we talking about? I am doing a very special July 4th stream where I go through the legacies of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and now Lyndon Johnson, and how basically America is getting by huffing the fumes of these two presidents, and how the entire political existence of conservatives, both then and now, has been trying to take away the good things that these administrations gave us. Yeah. In 1967, Johnson signed the Public Broadcasting Act to create educational television programs to supplement broadcast networks. Oh, that's really fun. So, like Sesame Street and shit, the Muppets, that's, thank the Johnson administration for that. And also Republicans fucking hate that because that's part of education funding and they want to defund that. In fact, they recently, I think, gutted the Department of Ed and are looking to fill it with like cronies and shit. And by cronies, I mean like people who will facilitate the privatization of the education system. In 1965, I don't like July 4th, but I love England losing. Well, England is losing, but we're talking about America right now. Johnson set up the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Endowment for the Arts. Both things that Republicans have publicly opposed, by the way. Conservatives fucking hate these. To support the study of literature, history, and law, and arts such as music, painting, and sculpture. So, that's Lyndon Johnson. That was a very, very long mouthful. Legitimately, it took me 2 full hours to go through just the Wikipedia pages on the legacies of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Lyndon B. Johnson. I'm not American, so I might be a bit dumb on this subject. That's perfectly fine. You know how, like, many European countries have, like, pretty basic functioning social democracies? America has, like, kind of a watered-down version of that, or at least did. Every program that you could identify as part of the sort of half-functioning American social democracy is attributable to one of two presidential administrations, Franklin Roosevelt or Lyndon Johnson. And characteristic of both of their administrations was that conservatives opposed every single thing that they did before they decided to do them, as they were trying to do them, and for decades after they had already done them. An example being the National Labor Relations Act, which was passed in 1937 and established the National Labor Relations Board and the right to organize. Republicans have been trying to undermine that shit. Well, I say Republicans, conservatives broadly, because the two parties haven't always been as ideologically well sorted as they are right now. Conservatives have been trying to upend that for literally the entire time that that legislation has existed. So right now that would be something like 87 years or more. Things like Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty and the funding that he directed towards educational institutions. And thank you for the follow. Medicare, Medicaid, both part of a comprehensive healthcare reform package that was designed to give healthcare to the elderly and the poor. Republicans hated that when they were trying to do that in the 60s, and they've spent decades trying to undermine it and been chipping away Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education funding, labor standards, the Labor Relations Board, unions, fucking all these like different New Deal programs that include like public works and infrastructure funding and communications regulation, all sorts of regulatory bodies. They've been like fervently working like overtime. That's their whole identity. They're like the USA's Reform Party. Yeah, they kind of are, you know, a little bit. And recently a bill passed the House and then the Senate and then the House again, the reconciliation progress, and is on the way to the president's desk, that is called the Big Beautiful Bill. And it cuts Medicare and Medicaid for to such an extent, I believe, that 17 million people are going to lose their healthcare coverage. People will die because of this. It also cuts food stamps, food assistance programs, another product of, I believe, the Roosevelt administration, if I'm remembering right. This is just to highlight, you know, a kind of America-centric politics stream this time. How much conservatives have always just been in favor of like bad shit. Yeah, the kamikaze bill. It also continues like a very destructive trend of like rolling back taxation, rolling back like progressive tax brackets and stuff. And what I wanted to highlight is that people say that FDR saved capitalism, and that's kind of true. It is kind of insane how in tatters the American economic system was in the 1930s. Why is Trump both Nigel Farage and Liz Truss combined? Don't insult my mans. He's way funnier than both of those people. But I do get what you're saying. Yeah, all the incompetence of Liz Truss and the fucking I hate minorities component of Nigel Farage. Although I mean, Liz Truss also hates minorities. I know that much about them. Yeah, you know, the capitalism was in such tatters that in 2/3 of the states in the United States, there were no functioning banks. The banks had all been shut down. There was nowhere you could store your money. This is where the phrase storing your money under the mattress comes from. People had to store their money in a place such as under their mattress, because in most states in America, there was literally no bank that you could take your money to. They were all closed. There was no, and it's not like, oh yeah, we're a bank, but we won't take your money. No, there's just no banks. And so a lot of regulations got passed, including the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which basically says like, yeah, if you deposit your money in the bank, that's still your money, and the bank has to give you that money back if you ask them for it, and they have to like not spend your money on shit. That used to not be a thing. Banks could just take your money and be like, all right, cool, see ya, and then spend it on shit. And they still do that, but there's like a hard limit that like, okay, banks, you have to have this much money per person. Republicans want to get rid of that too. in a way, it's kind of conflicting for me because I am a socialist. That FDR was a person that you could largely attribute as the savior of American capitalism because he did objectively good things that America is still riding off of the success of today. But at the same time, it would like, for what ultimately? Just so we could get back to a point where capitalism is cannibalizing itself and the system is falling to tatters in such a way that can only be addressed if you actually like change the system substantially enough that it's no longer capitalism, right? Like the toxic incentives created by competition and the resulting consolidation of wealth and the like over financialization of everything. These are features inherent to capitalism and that have to be addressed. In fact, if I could go back to the Lyndon Johnson article. Last time I did a politics test, I got the Scottish Socialist Party, but I don't know what socialism is. Socialism, put in a very basic framework, is a democratic organization of the economy, where there's no such thing as a shareholder or a business owner or anything like that. Rather, people work and they either own or take part in a collective stake at the place that they are working at. You know, think of something like a workers' cooperative or a workers' self-directed enterprise or a workers' union. Basically, in a socialist economy, I guess what I'm describing here might be like market socialism. The economy would be organized exclusively by cooperatives and workplaces that are heavily integrated with their unions, and there's no ownership structure outside of the people that work there, the workers themselves. You know, you don't have executives necessarily, and if you do, they are elected. Basically, take like a representative democracy and just apply that to like a business. You elect the president, you elect the board of like representatives or whatever. You elect the managers and the other ruling officials. That is a very easily comprehensible, I think, form of socialism. But fundamentally, it's a form of society that is like democratic all the way down. Capitalism is needed to reach socialism, which is the end goal, IMO, for any country. White Wolf 2206, welcome to chat. And yes, under the Marxist view, under a Marxist like materialist framework, capitalism is a necessary developmental stage to reach socialism. However, I would there's some debate as to whether or not it is mechanically necessary to transition from feudalism to capitalism to socialism, or whether an economy can be directly reorganized from, say, feudalism or a tribal state to socialism. Nonetheless, in terms of the mass psychology of the adherents of a given political system and the, I guess, the rulership structure, it is the logical progression that first you have a rapidly industrializing capitalism, which would then have to give way to socialism eventually. Right now we're in like fucking end stage capitalism, where a lot of the big business people are reminiscent of landlords simply owning digital fiefs that they charge rents for. You know. In fact, I actually saw, like, it's possible to accidentally do socialism, funnily enough. Let me scroll down. There's one program from Lyndon Johnson, from his War on Poverty. Lyndon Johnson, characteristic of the America mindset, declared war on poverty. CCP did something similar in China, controlled capitalism. No, that's state capitalism. That's not socialism. I guess Lenin envisioned something like state capitalism as a transitory phase, but ultimately I think what the CCP is doing has long since abandoned any claim to even aiming towards socialism, because it is you have a capital ownership class and you have a working class. and it is a market economy. You merely have more enterprises that are owned by the state, and you have more of that corporate power and state power rolled together. So, here we go. 1964 State of the Union address, Johnson said, "This administration today, here and now, declares an unconditional war on poverty in America. Our aim is not only to relieve the symptoms of poverty, but to cure it, and above all, to prevent it." I see that makes sense. Yeah. In April of 1964, Johnson proposed the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964, which would create the Office of Economic Opportunity to oversee local community action agencies charged with dispensing aid to those in poverty. Literally a like legally mandated mutual aid organization. Each CAA was required to have maximum feasible participation from local residents, who would design and operate anti-poverty programs unique to their community's needs. Citizen participation in alleviating poverty, in strengthening the economy of the local community. This was threatening to local political regimes who saw CAAs as alternative power structures. This is literally how you would build socialism. It is a directly participatory, democratic, small d democratic effort to address poverty in local communities across the country. And local political entities were like, nah, that threatens our power, dog. You're not doing that. He was so real for this. Unfortunately, it didn't get passed. The result of opposition and amendments to this bill resulted in a halt to the citizen participation reform movement. Literally, they were like, the biggest thing we take issue with is the fact that citizens will be able and allowed to participate in their own communities, in like directing economic resources in their own communities. This would have been a very early stage of socialism. But instead we get the Job Corps and AmeriKorps, which is just like, the Peace Corps, but domestically. Anyway, I didn't expect to like what Lyndon Johnson did as much as I did. I knew that Johnson's administration was responsible for Medicare and Medicaid, but this is just to like, I guess I just wanted to do this to nail the point home that like America was built off of the successes of the left and of social democrats, and it has coasted on that success up until today. All of the other, with the exception of maybe Eisenhower, and like, I don't know, I guess maybe the EPA under Nixon, so much of what every other president outside of Roosevelt and Johnson did is irrelevant to modern America, that like you could fairly characterize America as only being as powerful and economically resilient as it is thanks to those two presidential administrations. The Roosevelt administration from 1933 to 1945, and the Johnson administration from 1963 to 1969. And the life mission of conservatives in this country is to chip away at those reforms that were made by those administrations. One of which being the outlawing of child labor. One of the accomplishments of FDR was that the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 was passed, which at the same time established the 40-hour work week, legally mandated overtime pay, guaranteed the right to organize in the letter of the law for every worker, and outlawed child labor. And Republicans have been like trying to roll that back as much as they can, to such an extent that we saw a wave in 2023, 24, and in some limited capacity now in 2025. Republicans at the regional level and municipal level have defined themselves by trying to roll back child labor regulations and try to do child labor again. I remember there was an explosion of news articles back when the news actually printed real shit, and when they weren't just the smoldering fascist propaganda wreckage that they are now, of kids losing limbs in industrial accidents again in the year 2024. You know? So, you know, I feel like, as uncomfortable as this might be to acknowledge, things are going to get worse before they get better. And I feel like we are, like, this is a huge crossroads where it is socialism or barbarism. And the government picked barbarism. And now I think Americans are pretty ready to pick socialism if it's presented to them nicely enough. Or not nicely in the sense that like you're capitulating to people's reactionary instincts, but just like if you're good at presentation, right? We saw this with Zoran Mamdani. Like, motherfucker, he won Wall Street more so than Andrew Cuomo did, which is insane. You know, Wall Street looked at Zoran Mamdani and they were like, yes, I want socialism, actually. Glory to Chairman Mamdani. Wall Street. Unfortunately, not Staten Island, though, or the, or Queens, I think. Queens and Staten Island both voted for Cuomo, which cements the theory that it is the upper middle class suburbanites that are the backbone of capitalism and fascism when the two come into like sort of combined forces. And then like there are some people who are very wealthy that are between the level of upper middle class and billionaires. You have like the sort of boilerplate owning class of like millionaires and multimillionaires that are like, dog, please fucking take my money. Society is dying around me. Socialism winning of Wall Street is crazy. It is. Let me see if I can actually find that vote total. Here, hold on. New York City mayor primary results map. I need to see this. I need it. I need it so badly. Okay, here's from the New York Times, right? Here's Manhattan. Behold, Wall Street. You can't make this shit up. Granted, there's not that many people that, like, live here, but, like, legit. Look at this shit. Let me see if I can literally find the actual Wall Street here. Wall Street. Yeah, there it is. There's Wall Street. The whole financial district, by the way. Overwhelming Mamdani victory in the fucking financial district. And then, like, even fucking Manhattan, the wealthiest of the boroughs, I think, voted more for Mamdani than for Cuomo. Blue is Cuomo, and then orange is the people want socialism. And then there is some purple that's for, like, Brad Lander, who is also cool. You can see that, like, Queens and Staten Island mostly went for Cuomo. New York City, baby. Anyways. That's all I had planned for this stream. Usually I'm playing like Mario Kart or some shit. I do talk politics when I play Mario Kart, but you know, it's usually not just me and the good people at home. So I'm gonna find somebody to raid. And then next time, hopefully, I will be back with the Mario Kart. But yeah, so basically America was like a halfway functioning kind of not really social democracy thanks to like the what I would characterize as the American equivalents of Juan Perón. But now they're like, nah, you don't get good shit actually. So let me raid. Already talked about politics every stream. This is interesting. I'm very interested in politics. I got interested. I had like developed strong moral convictions in high school, and those moral convictions came to a head with politics when Trump won the election in 2016. And ever since then, I've followed politics very closely, and my knowledge has only grown since then. You know, I used to be just a regular like hobbyist national politics Andy, but since then, you know, my political imagination has grown. The scope of my political knowledge has grown to such an extent that like I can regularly engage in discussions about like affordable housing and shit at a pretty granular level. And I'm very interested in seeing left populism win wherever it surfaces, because like that shit's pretty good, man. And when you get down to it, a lot of it's like, you know, uh, uh, is just like, yeah, what if we did democracy, but like for real this time, and not like, haha, you all get to vote, but like functionally the decisions have already been made beforehand, and people still have very little role in determining the fate of their own communities and stuff like that. Yeah. The 9 to 5 work life shall burn. True. It is beyond it is beyond insane that the 40-hour work week is still the standard, even after like numerous studies have been conducted and found that like that's more work than is healthy for a human being. You know, I was a hardcore Marxist during high school. I've changed since. Well, I don't know if you could neatly call me a Marxist. I guess to the extent that I would ascribe a person's name to my ideological beliefs, I would be more of a Luxemburgist. But I mean, I guess she would call herself a Marxist, so I don't know. Like 9 to 2 is fine. 9 to 2 is pretty fine, you know. Insofar as the amount of work that it's healthy for a human being to be doing, insofar as the amount of work that is required to maintain current levels of production, uh, uh, and like the current standard of living for the like the developed world, we would be looking at 9 to 11. I'm not even joking. The amount of automation that has happened between the 1970s and now, even with something as simple as just a plain ass like keyboard, was so much that it made the same workload feasible in a quarter of the time. And what academics accurately predicted at the time was that instead of, and activists also predicted this, was that because of the relations of production, because of like the undemocratic nature of work and how work wasn't really engaged in to meet people's needs, it was engaged in to perpetuate a hierarchy. Instead of the work week shortening to reflect the newfound efficiency of work, it would instead maintain the same length, but there would be more busy work found to fill the hours that were no longer needed for real acts of production. And the result is an increasingly alienating landscape of work, a lot of which doesn't need to be maintained, but is maintained for the sake of toil. Here in Spain, the hour work week was reduced to 37.5 hours. That's a good start, but you know, ultimately, you really, you know, you'd like to see reduced more, is what I'm saying. I think like 20 hours per week is a pretty healthy benchmark for how long people should be working. That's more like along vibes, but we do know from research. France has 35. Yeah, France has 35 hours per week as the standards. In fact, they passed that law in like 2009. They were on top of that shit. I think from what research I've read about the 40-hour work week, 32 hours is ubiquitously both more healthy and more productive for people and production as a work week. There's just like no reason to have work still be 40 hours per week. Anyways, ooh, I haven't rated Aoife in a while. But she is doing, or they're doing, I don't know if they prefer she or they. They're doing a movie watch along. 20 to 25, 20 if Monday to Friday, 25 if Monday to Saturday. Yeah, that makes sense. You know, we work 4 to 5 hours per day. Not bad. So let me raid Aoife B. Enjoy the movie watch along. I don't know what movie they got in mind, but you know, I'm sure it'll be a good one. Or maybe it won't be, but you'll probably have fun all the same. All right, see y'all next time.